I still remember the sound of the airport announcement before we boarded that flight. It was calm, almost too calm for a moment that would later split my life into before and after. My husband held my hand tightly as we walked through the gate. He always did that when we traveled, as if he could somehow anchor me to safety just by touch. We were not rich people. We were ordinary. The kind who saved for months just to afford a single international trip. The kind who packed food from home because airport meals felt too expensive. The kind who counted every rupee but still dared to dream of seeing another country together. That was us, simple, hopeful, and together. I remember sitting by the window. The sky looked soft, like a blanket of white cotton stretched over the world. My husband smiled at me when the plane started moving. He said something light, something ordinary, something I can't even remember now because my mind has erased so many small things to make space for the one terrible moment that followed. The plane lifted, the ground disappeared, and for a while I thought life was still normal. People around us were settling in. A child behind us was kicking his feet against the seat. A man across the aisle was scrolling on his phone. A flight attendant passed by with a polite smile. Everything looked like any other flight in the world. I leaned toward my husband and asked him if he thought the weather would be cold when we landed. He laughed softly and said I always worried about things too early. That was his way, calm, patient, always slightly amused by my concerns. I liked that about him. It made the world feel less heavy. But then something changed. At first, it was subtle, a shift in movement, a strange pause in the rhythm of the cabin. I noticed a flight attendant walking back faster than before, her steps no longer relaxed. Then another one appeared, her face tighter, her eyes scanning. I felt my husband's grip on my hand tighten slightly. Not fear yet, just awareness. And then it happened. A man stood up somewhere ahead of us. I didn't see him clearly at first, only the movement, the sudden sharp interruption of normalcy. People turned their heads, confused. Someone asked him to sit down. A few nervous laughs floated in the air, like the cabin itself was unsure whether to be worried. But then I saw it. His hand. Something metallic. Cold. Wrong. A gun. The world didn't explode. It didn't scream immediately, it froze first. That is what I remember most clearly, the freezing. Even the child behind us stopped kicking his feet. The man moved forward, and suddenly I saw who he was holding. A woman. She looked young. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her face pale with shock. The gun was pressed against her head so tightly that I could see her trying not to breathe too hard. A sound came from somewhere in the cabin, a small gasp, maybe mine, maybe someone else. I don't know anymore. The man's voice was low, sharp, controlled. He said something about not moving, about listening, about consequences. But the exact words blurred together in my memory. What I remember is the tone, not chaos, not panic, control. That was what made it worse. My husband leaned closer to me. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Don't look too much," he said. But I was already looking. Because in situations like that, your eyes betray your fear. They want answers even when your mind refuses to accept reality. The flight attendants were trying to move slowly, carefully. One of them raised her hands slightly, speaking in a calm voice, trying to soothe him. But the man with the gun didn't respond like someone who could be soothed. He responded like someone who had already decided everything. The woman in his grip trembled. I could see tears forming in her eyes, but she wasn't crying loudly. She was holding it in, like she believed silence might keep her alive. I remember thinking something strange in that moment. I remember thinking, this cannot be real. This is not how life happens. My husband squeezed my hand again, harder this time. I turned to him. He looked different, not panicked, not shocked, but alert in a way I had never seen before, like his mind had shifted into a place I didn't fully understand. "What do we do?" I whispered. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed forward, watching the man, watching the cabin, measuring distances I couldn't see. That silence scared me more than the gun. The plane continued flying. That was the most disturbing part. The world outside didn't care. The clouds were still soft. The sky was still blue, but inside that metal tube, time had stopped being normal. Someone started crying quietly behind us. Another passenger prayed under their breath. A phone dropped somewhere, making a sharp sound that felt too loud. The man with the gun shouted suddenly, and the entire cabin stiffened again. The woman in his grip flinched. I felt my heart jump so violently I thought it might break my ribs. My husband leaned closer again. "If anything happens," he said quietly, "stay down." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" I asked. But he didn't answer properly, not then. Instead, he just kept watching. And that is when I realized something I still don't fully understand even today. He wasn't only afraid. He was preparing. And I didn't know what he was preparing for. The plane's engines roared steadily beneath us, indifferent to everything happening inside. The air felt heavier now, like it was filled with invisible pressure pressing down on every passenger. The woman with the gun at her head made a small sound, a broken sound, the kind that doesn't belong in public spaces, the kind that belongs in nightmares. And I remember thinking, very clearly, that I wanted to wake up. But I didn't. And that was the moment I understood that my life had already begun to change, even though I didn't yet know how much I was about to lose. The cabin never returned to normal after that moment. Even though no one was moving wildly, the silence itself had become a kind of noise. It pressed against everyone's ears, heavy and suffocating. I could hear my own breathing too loudly, like it didn't belong to me anymore. The man with the gun stayed where he was, holding the woman in front of him like a shield, like a warning. His voice cut through the air again and again, sharp demands, orders that made the flight attendants move slowly between rows. One of them had tears in her eyes, but she kept nodding, trying to stay calm, trying not to provoke him. I don't know how much time passed. On a plane, time loses meaning when fear takes over. It could have been minutes. It could have been an hour. Everything felt stretched, unreal, like the world had slowed down just to make the fear last longer. My husband didn't move much. That's what I noticed. While others panicked in small, silent ways, tightened hands, shaking legs, closed eyes, he stayed focused forward. His posture was different now. Straighter, alert, like something in him had shifted from passenger to something else entirely. I leaned closer to him. "Please tell me what's going to happen," I whispered. He didn't look at me immediately. His eyes were still fixed on the front of the cabin, tracking the man's movements. "I don't know everything," he said quietly, "but we need to stay calm." That was not an answer. It was something to hold on to, but it didn't comfort me. The woman being held at gunpoint cried silently now. Her tears fell without sound, and I remember thinking how strange it was that even her fear had learned to be quiet. The man holding her seemed impatient, angry, like time itself was irritating him. Then the intercom crackled. A flight attendant tried to speak, her voice shaking slightly but still professional. She said something about safety, about listening, about trying to resolve the situation. But the man shouted back before she could finish. His voice was louder now, more unstable. The cabin flinched as one. A child began crying. The sound spread panic like fire. A mother tried to hush him, but even she was shaking. My hands were cold. I realized I was holding my breath without meaning to. My husband suddenly leaned forward slightly. Not enough to draw attention, but enough that I noticed. "What are you doing?" I whispered urgently. "Nothing," he said quickly, "just watching." But I could feel something different in him now, something tense, calculated, as if his mind was running through invisible steps I could not see. The man with the gun started packing slightly in the front section, dragging the woman with him. She stumbled once, and I thought he might hurt her right there, but he didn't. He tightened his grip instead, like he wanted her alive more than anything, but only as long as she obeyed. A flight attendant slowly approached again, hands raised. And then, the man did something that made everyone freeze harder than before. He pressed the gun closer to the woman's head and shouted something about communication, about demands, about not being ignored. I felt my stomach drop. My husband's jaw tightened. That was the first time I saw fear in his face, not panic, but recognition, like he understood something about the situation that I didn't. I touched his arm. "Please," I said again, "tell me the truth." He finally looked at me then. And what I saw in his eyes scared me more than the man with the gun. Because it wasn't just fear. It was decision. Before I could ask anything else, a sudden loud noise came from the front. A tray fell, or something metallic. The cabin reacted instantly, every head turning at once. The man shouted again, louder this time, more aggressive. The woman in his grip cried out softly. And then my husband did something I didn't expect. He released my hand. Just for a second. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but I felt it like a break in reality. "Stay here," he whispered. And before I could stop him, he started to move. Not toward the aisle randomly, but forward. Carefully. Deliberately. And in that moment, I realized this flight was no longer just a hostage situation to me. It was becoming something connected to my husband in a way I didn't understand yet. And I was about to find out why. I watched my husband move, and for a moment my mind refused to accept what my eyes were showing me. People don't just get up in a situation like this. They don't leave their seat when a gun is pointed at someone's head. Everything inside me wanted to pull him back, to grab his sleeve, to force him into stillness again. But I didn't move fast enough. He stepped into the aisle with a calmness that didn't match the chaos around us. Not slow out of fear, not fast out of panic, just controlled. That was what made it worse. Other passengers noticed too. A few heads turned. Someone whispered something I couldn't hear. My chest tightened. "Please don't," I said under my breath, but he didn't hear me anymore. At the front of the cabin, the man with the gun was still holding the woman tightly. The flight attendants were frozen in careful positions, trying not to provoke him. Every movement was measured, like one wrong breath could break something irreversible. And then my husband stopped. He wasn't close to the front yet, not close enough to be noticed clearly, but close enough that I could feel the danger rising in my throat like bile. He stood still for a second, looking forward, and I could see his shoulders rise slightly as he took a breath. It was not fear. It was preparation. The man with the gun suddenly shifted his attention slightly, scanning the cabin again, as if sensing movement. My heart jumped so hard I thought it would leave my body. But my husband didn't move again. Not yet. I gripped the edge of my seat, my fingers trembling. Every instinct told me to stand, to call him back, to do something, anything, but my body refused to cooperate. Fear makes cowards of even the strongest thoughts. The woman being held at gunpoint let out a soft sound, like she was slipping out of strength. The man holding her jerked her slightly, angry, warning her silently not to collapse. His grip was brutal, but controlled, like he still needed her alive for whatever reason was driving him. And then my husband spoke. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. But in that silent, suffocating cabin, even a whisper becomes thunder. "I think you should let her go." Everything stopped. Even the air seemed to pause. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. No one breathed. The man with the gun froze, his head turning slowly toward the aisle. And I felt my entire soul leave my body. Because now he had noticed him. My husband. I saw the moment recognition hit the man's expression. Not surprise exactly. Something deeper, something sharper, like a memory had been stabbed awake. "You," the man said slowly. Just that one word. But it carried weight, history, meaning I didn't understand. My husband didn't step back. He stayed exactly where he was. "I told you this wouldn't end well," my husband said quietly. My blood ran cold. He knew him. He knew him. I felt like the plane tilted, even though it didn't move. The passengers around us were no longer just passengers. They were witnesses now. Every eye was locked forward, trying to understand what was happening, but no one dared to speak. The man with the gun tightened his grip on the woman. She cried out softly, a broken sound. "Don't move," the man snapped. But his voice had changed slightly. Less confident now, more tense. My husband lifted one hand slowly, not in surrender, not in aggression, something in between. "I'm not here to make this worse," he said. "Just let her go, you don't need her." The man laughed once. A short, bitter sound. "You always talk like you understand everything," he said. And that sentence, "you always talk like you understand everything," cut through me in a way I can't explain, because it wasn't just about this moment. It was about something before it, something I had never seen. My husband took a step forward. My whole body screamed at him to stop. But he didn't. And then the man with the gun did something that changed everything again. He pressed the gun harder against the woman's head and pulled her slightly backward, deeper into the front space. And then he said something that I will never forget. "You think I forgot what you did." Silence crashed down harder than before. My husband didn't respond immediately. And in that silence, I felt it. The truth was not starting now. It had already started long before this flight. And I was only just beginning to understand that the man I had been holding hands with at the airport was not just a passenger. He was part of this story in a way I had never imagined. After those words, something inside the plane changed in a way I cannot describe properly even now. It was not just fear anymore. It was history entering the present, like two lives that had been separated for years had suddenly collided again at 30,000 feet, with nowhere for anyone to escape. I sat frozen in my seat, my hands gripping the armrest so tightly my fingers hurt. My husband was still standing in the aisle. The man with the gun was still holding the woman, but his attention was no longer fully on her. It was split now, between her and my husband. That scared me more than anything before. Because a divided mind is unpredictable. "You think I forgot what you did," the man had said. My husband didn't answer immediately. For a moment, I thought he might deny it or try to calm him down again. But instead, he lowered his gaze slightly, like he was weighing something heavy inside himself. The silence stretched so long that even the passengers began to understand something important was happening. This was not random. This was not a stranger attacking strangers. There was a connection, a past. Finally, my husband spoke. "I didn't think you were still alive," he said quietly. A soft gasp came from somewhere behind me. My stomach dropped. The man with the gun laughed again, but this time it wasn't confident. It was sharp, broken at the edges. "Of course you didn't," he said. "People like you never think consequences survive." I looked at my husband, really looked at him, as if I was seeing him for the first time. His face looked different under this pressure. Not unfamiliar, but unfinished, like I was only now seeing the part of him he had never shown me. The woman in the attacker's grip was trembling harder now. She didn't understand any of this, and yet she was trapped in the middle of it. Her fear had become something secondary compared to the tension between the two men. One of the flight attendants slowly stepped back, pressing her hand slightly toward her mouth, trying not to cry. Another was frozen near the emergency exit, unsure whether to move or stay. My husband took another careful step forward. "Let her go," he repeated, softer this time. "She has nothing to do with this." The man's grip tightened again. "She's exactly what I need right now," he replied. His voice had changed again. Less chaos, more focus. That was worse. Focused anger is far more dangerous than emotional panic. I felt tears in my eyes, but I couldn't even blink properly. My husband spoke again, but this time his tone shifted. There was something heavier behind it. "You came onto this flight knowing I might be here," he said. "That means this was planned, not random." The man didn't deny it. That silence confirmed everything. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might faint. Planned. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a sudden breakdown. This was directed at him. At my husband. My mind started spinning. Questions hit me all at once. Who was this man? What had my husband done? Why was this happening on a flight we were supposed to take together for a peaceful trip? I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to ask him everything at once, but my voice felt trapped somewhere deep inside my throat. The man suddenly shifted position, dragging the woman slightly closer to the front panel. "Do you remember her?" he asked. My husband didn't answer immediately. And that pause, just that one pause, was enough to make my stomach drop again. Because hesitation is sometimes more dangerous than confession. "I remember," my husband said finally. The words landed like a stone, dropped into water. The woman in his grip made a small sound, confused, terrified, realizing she was not just a random victim anymore. She was connected too. Somehow. Somewhere. The plane felt smaller now, the air thicker. Every passenger felt trapped not just physically, but inside a story they never agreed to enter. My husband's voice lowered. "You should not have brought her into this," he said. The man's expression twisted. "You don't get to decide that anymore." And then something shifted again. He adjusted his grip slightly, moving the gun in a way that made several passengers gasp. My heart stopped. But he didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he said something that froze me even deeper. "You took everything from me once," he said. "Now I take everything from you." And in that moment, I understood something terrifying. This was not about control. This was about revenge. And I was sitting in the middle of it, watching my husband face a past I had never been told existed, while a woman's life hung between them like a breaking thread. And I had no idea which one of them would break first. The words, "You took everything from me once," kept echoing in my mind like something trapped inside a closed room, refusing to die down. I kept replaying it, searching for meaning, searching for a version of my husband that could fit into that accusation. But nothing made sense. I knew him as a calm man, a patient man, someone who paid attention to small things, who never raised his voice at home, who would always wait for me to finish speaking before answering. That was the man I married. But the man standing in that aisle was being spoken to like someone else entirely. The cabin felt tighter now. Even the smallest movement of air felt dangerous. No one spoke. No one dared. The woman being held was trembling more violently now, her strength clearly fading. The gun stayed near her head, unwavering. My husband's voice came again, quieter now. "This is not her fault," he said. The man laughed, but it was bitter. "You always say that," he replied. "That's what you said back then, too." Back then. That phrase hit me harder than anything else. Back then meant a time I didn't know, a time before me, a life my husband had lived that I was never part of. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to scream his name and force him to turn around and explain everything. But fear pinned me down harder than gravity. My husband looked at the woman for a moment, then back at the man. "You don't even realize what you're doing," he said. "Oh, I do," the man snapped. "I'm correcting it." The word correcting made something cold spread through my chest. This wasn't just anger. It wasn't even just revenge anymore. It was belief, the kind of belief that doesn't bend. The flight attendants were still trying to maintain calm, but their training was failing against something like this. One of them slowly stepped back toward the intercom, her fingers shaking as she tried not to draw attention. A passenger behind me whispered a prayer again and again, faster now. I couldn't hear my own heartbeat anymore. It felt like it had disappeared. My husband took another step forward. This time, the man reacted instantly. "Stop right there," he warned, pressing the gun closer to the woman's head. The woman cried out softly, her body trembling so much it looked like she might collapse completely. And then something inside my husband finally broke through his calm exterior. "Don't," he said sharply. It was the first time his voice carried real force. Not panic, not fear, but command. The cabin reacted to it. Even the air seemed to pause again. The man's eyes narrowed. "There it is," he said quietly. "That voice, the same voice you used when you thought you could control everything." My mind was spinning faster now. Control everything. What did that mean? My husband wasn't like that. He wasn't controlling. He wasn't powerful in that way, or at least I never saw him that way. But the man spoke like he knew a completely different version of him. My husband lowered his tone again. "I didn't come here to relive the past," he said. "Let her go and we can talk." The man shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Talking is what you did last time. Talking is how she ended up dead." The world stopped. Dead. The word didn't just enter the cabin. It sank into every person's chest at once. I felt my entire body go cold. The woman in his grip froze too, as if she had just been told her fate without warning. My husband's expression changed slightly. For the first time, I saw something crack in his control. Not guilt exactly. But wait. Something heavy and unresolved. My breathing became shallow. Dead. Someone had died before. Because of this. Because of them. The man continued, his voice sharper now. "You stood there and talked while she bled out, and now you think you can save someone again." A soft sound escaped from somewhere in the cabin, a broken gasp, someone covering their mouth. My eyes burned. I couldn't process it fast enough. My husband stepped forward again, but slower this time, more careful. "That is not what happened," he said firmly. But even as he said it, there was something in his voice that sounded like it carried exhaustion, like he had said those words before, many times, to himself. The man laughed again. "You don't get to rewrite it," he said. And then he did something that changed everything again. He slightly shifted the gun, not away from the woman, but toward the cabin. A warning gesture. A reminder that everyone was included now. "I lost my sister," he said suddenly. The word sister landed differently. Not random violence. Not stranger hatred. Family. My throat tightened. The man's voice broke slightly for the first time. "She trusted you," he said, now quieter but more intense. "You told her everything would be fine." My husband closed his eyes briefly. Just for a second. And in that second, I felt my entire world tilt. Because silence can also be an answer. When he opened his eyes again, they looked heavier. "I tried to save her," he said. The man shook his head. "You failed." The cabin felt like it was collapsing inward. And I, sitting helplessly in my seat, realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a hijacking. It was a confession being forced out in front of strangers at 30,000 feet. And I was married to one of the people inside it. The word sister stayed in the air long after he said it, as if it had weight of its own, pressing down on everyone inside the cabin. I could feel it settling into my chest, heavy and suffocating. Nothing about this situation felt like a random act anymore. It had become something deeply personal between two men, and every passenger on that plane had been dragged into a story they never chose. My husband stood still in the aisle. The man with the gun still held the woman tightly, but his eyes were no longer only on her. They kept returning to my husband, like he was both the target and the source of everything. The woman in his grip was crying quietly now, not fighting anymore, just enduring. I noticed her knees shaking as if she could collapse at any second. The gun stayed close enough to remind her she was not allowed to fall. My husband spoke again, softer this time. "I didn't let her die," he said. "I was trying to stop it from getting worse." The man's face twisted. "That's what you always say," he replied. "You always turn failure into justification." I felt my hands go numb. Failure. So something had gone wrong before. Something irreversible. I tried to hold onto the seat tighter, but even that felt distant, like my body wasn't fully connected to my mind anymore. I was listening, but I wasn't understanding quickly enough. Every sentence added another layer of shock. The man suddenly shifted his stance, pulling the woman slightly backward again, and for a moment I thought he might lose control completely. But he didn't. Instead, he steadied himself, breathing sharply. "She trusted you," he repeated, quieter now. "My sister believed you when you said she would be safe." My husband's jaw tightened. "I never promised her safety," he said firmly. That response made something flicker in the man's expression. Anger, confusion, pain all mixed together. My heart was beating too fast now. I could feel it in my throat. My husband continued. "She was involved in something bigger than she understood," he said. "I tried to pull her out before it collapsed." "Collapsed," the man repeated sharply. "You call that collapse? She was alive when you got involved." Silence again. But this time, it felt different. Not empty. Loaded. The flight attendants stood frozen near the front, unsure whether to intervene or disappear into the background. One of them was visibly shaking. Another had tears streaming down her face but kept her hands steady. The passengers behind me were whispering now, but even those whispers were dying quickly as fear grew heavier. My husband took a careful step forward again. "Listen to me," he said. "If you had known everything, you wouldn't be standing here with a gun." The man let out a short, broken laugh. "Oh, I know enough," he said. "I know you left her alone when she needed you most." My husband's expression changed slightly. That pause again. Just a fraction. But I noticed it. And so did the man. "There it is," the man said quickly. "That silence, that's where the truth lives." My stomach turned. I suddenly felt like I was falling without moving. My husband exhaled slowly. "She wasn't supposed to be there when things escalated," he said. "It wasn't planned that way." The man's grip tightened. "Nothing about her death was supposed to happen," he snapped. "But it did, because of you." The word death again struck the cabin like a physical force. My vision blurred slightly. I could hear someone sobbing quietly behind me now. The sound was no longer hidden. My husband looked down for a moment, just briefly, as if choosing his next words carefully. "She got caught in a chain reaction," he said. "Something I was trying to stop." The man's eyes widened slightly. "A chain reaction," he repeated. "Yes," my husband said, "and I've lived with it every day since." For a second, everything went quiet. Even the engine noise felt distant. Then the man laughed again, but this time it wasn't anger. It was disbelief mixed with pain. "You think living with guilt changes what happened," he said. "You think that fixes her being gone." My husband didn't answer immediately. And that silence was louder than anything before. I felt tears forming in my eyes now, but I didn't wipe them away. Because I realized something I didn't want to accept. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about unfinished grief. And both men were trapped inside it, pulling everyone else into the wreckage. The man suddenly pressed the gun slightly upward, and every passenger stiffened at once. My heart stopped. But he didn't fire. Instead, he said something quieter, almost broken. "She died alone," he said, "and you weren't there." My husband closed his eyes again, just for a moment. And when he opened them, his voice was different. He said softly, "I tried to go back." The man shook his head slowly. "But you were too late." The cabin felt like it had no air left. And I, sitting there helplessly, began to understand that this flight was not just carrying passengers anymore. It was carrying consequences. And those consequences had finally caught up midair. After those words, "You were too late," something inside the plane shifted again, but this time it wasn't just emotional. It felt like the situation itself was tightening, like a rope being pulled from both ends until it was ready to snap. My husband stood very still in the aisle, but I could see it now, the smallest signs of strain, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders no longer looked fully relaxed. He was holding something inside him, something heavy and old, and it was finally being forced into the open. The man with the gun was still in control physically, but emotionally he was unraveling in a different way. His grip on the woman tightened and loosened in uneven patterns, like even he was struggling to keep himself stable. The woman's breathing had become shallow. She wasn't fighting anymore. She was just surviving each second as it came. The cabin felt unreal. No one spoke. Even crying had reduced to silent shaking. My husband spoke again, softer now, almost like he was trying not to disturb something fragile in the man's memory. "You think I didn't try to reach her," he said. "You think I didn't go back for her." The man's eyes snapped toward him immediately. "That's exactly what I think," he replied. My hands were trembling so badly now, I had to press them into my lap to stop them from shaking visibly. Every sentence was carving pieces out of the unknown past I had lived beside without ever seeing. My husband continued. "She was already taken when I found out how serious it had become," he said. "I wasn't even supposed to be the one involved in that phase." The man let out a harsh breath. "You were always involved," he said, "from the beginning." Silence again. But this silence felt different from before. It felt like both of them were circling something they didn't want to fully say out loud. The flight attendants had stopped moving entirely now. One of them had her hand pressed against her mouth, tears slipping silently down her face. Another was frozen near the front, as if even breathing too loudly could trigger something irreversible. The passengers behind me were no longer just afraid. They were exhausted by fear. My husband's voice lowered again. "She came to me for help," he said. "Not because I forced her, because she had nowhere else to go." The man's expression tightened. "And you think that makes it better," he said. "You think that absolves you." My husband didn't respond immediately. And that pause, again, felt like a crack opening in a wall. "I think it explains why she was there," he said finally, "not what happened after." The man shook his head slowly, like he was refusing to accept anything that didn't fit his version of the truth. "No," he said, "what happened after is all that matters." His voice rose slightly at the end of the sentence, and the woman in his grip flinched hard. For a moment, I thought he might lose control completely. The gun moved slightly, and the entire cabin tensed as one living organism. But he didn't fire. Instead, he dragged her a small step backward again, closer to the front wall. My husband took a careful breath. "What do you want right now?" he asked. That question changed the air immediately. The man froze slightly, as if even he hadn't fully asked himself that question out loud yet. Then he answered. "I want you to feel what I felt," he said. His voice was quieter now, but more dangerous because of it. My stomach dropped. My husband didn't speak for a moment. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying. This was not about stopping anything anymore. This was about transferring pain. My husband finally spoke. "That's not possible," he said. The man's eyes hardened. "Oh, it is," he replied. "You're just not used to being on the receiving end." The woman began crying again, softly, brokenly. Her strength was fading fast. And then the man did something unexpected. He loosened his grip slightly, not enough to free her, but enough for her to breathe more easily. For a moment, hope flickered in the cabin. But it didn't last. Because he immediately pressed the gun closer again, reminding everyone that mercy was temporary. "I didn't bring her here just for you to talk," he said. "I brought her here because you always think you can fix things with words." My husband's expression hardened slightly. "I'm not trying to fix the past," he said. The man tilted his head. "Then why are you here?" he asked. That question hung in the air longer than anything before it. My husband looked at him directly. "Because I know what you're planning," he said. The cabin went silent in a way that felt unnatural. Even the crying stopped. The man's eyes narrowed. "And what am I planning?" he asked slowly. My husband didn't answer immediately. And in that pause, I felt something shift again. Because now there was something else in this story. Not just revenge. Not just grief. But something still coming. Something worse. And I had no idea what it was, the question the man asked, and what am I planning, didn't just hang in the air. It settled into the cabin like a weight that couldn't be lifted, pressing down on every breath, every heartbeat, every thought. For the first time since this nightmare began, my husband didn't answer immediately. And that silence changed everything. Because silence, in a situation like this, is never empty. It always means something is being calculated. The man with the gun noticed it too. His eyes narrowed, his grip tightening slightly again on the woman, who was now barely standing on her own. Her face was pale, her breathing uneven. She looked like she was surviving only because the situation had not yet decided to end her. My husband finally spoke, but his voice was lower now, more controlled. "You're not here just for revenge," he said. A faint, bitter smile appeared on the man's face. "Finally," he said, "you're starting to understand." My stomach twisted. My husband continued. "You're here because something else is still in motion," he said. "Something you think I can stop." That sentence made the entire cabin feel colder. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied my husband carefully, like he was deciding whether to confirm something or keep it hidden a little longer. Then he said, "You were always quick at seeing patterns." My husband didn't move. And I sat there, watching this exchange, feeling like I was drowning in a conversation I had never been invited to understand. The man shifted slightly, pulling the woman closer again, but not in panic this time. More like positioning, like everything he did had structure behind it. "You think this is just about her," he said. "My sister." His voice softened for a fraction of a second on the word sister, but it quickly hardened again. "But it's not." My heart dropped again. My husband's jaw tightened. The man continued. "She was the first piece," he said, "not the only one." A wave of confusion passed through the cabin. Even the passengers who had stopped thinking clearly were now sensing that the situation was expanding beyond what they could see. My husband's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then what is the rest?" he asked. The man smiled faintly again, but it wasn't humor. It was exhaustion mixed with certainty. "A system," he said simply. That word system didn't belong in this situation. It sounded too structured, too intentional, too large. My mind tried to process it, but it kept breaking apart. The man continued. "People like you always think it ends with one incident," he said. "One mistake, one death, one cover-up, but it doesn't." My husband spoke carefully now. "What exactly do you think I covered up?" The man's eyes sharpened instantly. "There it is," he said, still acting like you don't know. The woman in his grip made a small sound again, weaker now. Her body was barely holding itself upright. The man adjusted his stance, and for a second I thought he might finally release her. But instead he simply repositioned her again, like she was both leverage and reminder. My husband took a slow breath. "Tell me what you want from me," he said. The man laughed softly, but there was no joy in it. "I want you to stop pretending you were just a helper," he said. "You weren't cleaning up a mess. You were part of how it happened." My blood ran cold. Part of how it happened. The accusation was no longer just about one incident. It was about identity, about who my husband had been before I knew him. My husband shook his head slightly. "That's not true," he said firmly. But even I could hear something underneath his voice now. Not guilt. Not denial. Something more complicated. The man leaned slightly forward, still keeping control of the situation. "You were inside it," he said. "You just told yourself you were outside it." My husband didn't answer. And that silence was longer this time. The cabin felt like it was shrinking. The woman whispered something faintly, almost inaudible, like she was no longer fully aware of what was happening. My eyes stung again. The man's voice dropped slightly. "There's a reason I waited," he said. "A reason I didn't do this earlier." My husband looked at him carefully. "And what reason is that?" he asked. The man smiled faintly again. Because I needed proof, he said. That word, proof, made something shift inside me. My husband's expression tightened slightly. What proof? He asked. The man's eyes flickered briefly across the cabin, then back to him. That it didn't end, he said. A heavy silence followed. And then he added something that made the entire plane feel like it tilted again. It continued. My heart stopped. Continued. Not past tense. Not finished. Ongoing. My husband finally spoke, but his voice was quieter now. Where? He asked. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the woman in his grip, then back at my husband. And then he said the words that changed the direction of everything again. On this flight. For a moment after he said, on this flight, nothing inside me registered properly. My mind simply refused to accept it. Words lose meaning when they become too dangerous, and that one sentence felt like it didn't belong in reality at all. My husband's face changed immediately. Not fear. Not shock. Something sharper. Recognition. That was what terrified me most. Because until that moment, I had still believed, some part of me had still believed, that this was only about the past, about a wound reopening at the worst possible time. But now, it was no longer just history bleeding into the present. It was something active. Something happening right now. Inside this plane. The man with the gun noticed the change in my husband's expression. For the first time, he looked almost satisfied, like he had finally reached the point he had been aiming for since the beginning of this confrontation. Yes, he said quietly, now you're listening properly. My husband's voice came out lower than before. What did you do? He asked. The man gave a faint smile. I didn't do anything, he replied. I just followed the path you started. A cold wave moved through my chest. The woman in his grip was barely conscious now, her body weak, trembling. The gun remained close, but his focus was no longer entirely on her. She was still a shield, but also a reminder, a symbol. My husband took a slow step forward. Stop speaking in riddles, he said firmly. If there's something on this plane, say it clearly. The man tilted his head slightly. You always hated when things were unclear, he said, even back then. The phrase back then again hit like a hammer. My husband's jaw tightened. Tell me what you planted here, he said. The cabin went completely silent again. Even the engines felt distant now, as if the aircraft itself was holding its breath. The man slowly adjusted his grip on the woman, then glanced briefly toward the overhead compartments, toward the cabin space itself. And then he spoke. Not planted, he said, delivered. My stomach dropped. Delivered. That sounded planned, coordinated, not emotional anymore, not impulsive. My husband's eyes narrowed. You're not acting alone, he said. The man smiled faintly. No, he said, I never was. That was worse. Far worse. Because it meant this situation had layers I couldn't see, people I couldn't identify, a structure behind what was happening right in front of me. My husband's voice became sharper. What is inside this aircraft? He demanded. The man's expression changed slightly, becoming more focused. There are two kinds of passengers on this flight, he said. My entire body went cold. What are you talking about? My husband asked. The man ignored the question and continued. Some are here by accident, he said, and some are here because they were meant to be. A few passengers shifted uneasily in their seats. The idea alone was enough to break what little sense of safety remained. My hands started shaking again. My husband's voice lowered. You're endangering innocent people, he said. The man laughed softly. Innocent, he repeated. That word stopped meaning anything a long time ago. My husband took another step forward, closer now than before, but still careful. Whatever you think I did, he said, this is not the way to resolve it. The man's eyes hardened. "You don't get to lecture me about methods," he said. "Not after what you allowed to happen." The woman in his grip made a faint sound again, weaker now, almost fatting. My heart clenched. My husband looked at her briefly, then back at the man. "If there's something inside this plane," he said slowly, "you don't need her for this." The man's expression tightened again. "I do," he said simply. That answer chilled me more than anything else. Because it meant she was not random. Not collateral. Not even just leverage. She was part of a mechanism. My husband's voice softened slightly. "Tell me what you want me to stop," he said. The man stared at him for a long moment. And then he said, quietly but clearly, "The transfer." Silence. That word didn't belong in this environment either. It sounded technical, organized, like something planned outside of this moment. My husband's expression changed instantly. For the first time, I saw something like alarm pass through him. My stomach twisted harder. "What transfer?" he asked. The man tightened his grip slightly, as if confirming something only he understood. "The one you were supposed to prevent," he said. And then, after a pause, he added, "Mid-flight." My breath stopped. Mid-flight. Inside this aircraft. Right now. And suddenly, I realized something even more terrifying. This hijacking was not the main event. It was a disruption inside something already in motion. And whatever transfer meant, it was still happening above the clouds. After the word transfer, the cabin didn't feel like a plane anymore. It felt like a sealed container where something invisible had already been set in motion, and no one inside had the authority to stop it. My husband's face had changed completely now. The calm that had carried him through the confrontation was still there, but it was thinner, strained at the edges, like it could tear at any moment. The man with the gun noticed it too. He was watching him closely now, not just as an enemy, but as someone measuring impact. "You remember it now," the man said quietly. My husband didn't answer immediately. And that silence told me more than anything else so far. The woman in the man's grip was barely conscious. Her head hung slightly, her breathing weak and uneven. The gun was still there, still a threat, but she was no longer the center of attention. She had become part of something larger, something she was not meant to understand. My husband finally spoke. "There is no transfer on this aircraft," he said carefully. The man smiled faintly. "That's what you were told to believe," he replied. A cold pressure spread through my chest again. My mind kept trying to create simple explanations: terrorism, revenge, misunderstanding, but none of them fit anymore. Everything was becoming layered, technical, planned. My husband took a slow breath. "What exactly do you think is being transferred?" he asked. The man tilted his head slightly, as if deciding whether to answer directly or continue watching him suffer in uncertainty. Then he said, "Evidence." That single word landed differently. Evidence didn't belong in a hijacking. It belonged in investigations, courts, systems I didn't understand. My husband's eyes narrowed slightly. "What evidence?" he asked. The man's voice became quieter, but more intense. "Everything you tried to bury," he said. A ripple of tension moved through the cabin. Even those who didn't understand the full conversation could feel the weight of it. My hands were shaking again, but I couldn't even feel my fingers properly anymore. My husband spoke slowly. "If you're talking about what happened to your sister," he said, "that was not something I buried." The man's expression hardened instantly. "There it is again," he said sharply. "Always the same sentence." My husband didn't react. The man continued. "You keep separating yourself from it," he said, "like you were only watching." My husband's voice sharpened slightly. "Because I was trying to prevent escalation," he said. The man laughed once, dry and short. "And that's what you still tell yourself," he said. The cabin felt tighter again, as if every word reduced the space we had left to breathe. Then the man shifted slightly, pulling the woman a fraction closer again, and something in his posture changed. More serious now. More precise. "You asked what the transfer is," he said. My husband didn't move. "Yes," he said. The man looked directly at him. "It's everything that was taken from that incident," he said, "and everything that proves how it was handled afterward." My stomach turned. Handled afterward. My husband's expression tightened again. "You're talking about documents," he said slowly. The man didn't answer immediately. And that hesitation was enough. My chest tightened. The man finally spoke. "Not just documents," he said. "Recordings, logs, internal communications, proof of who made the decisions after she died." The word "died" hit again, but this time it didn't feel like accusation alone. It felt like structure. My husband's voice dropped. "You don't have that," he said. The man's eyes sharpened. "I didn't until today," he replied. The entire cabin seemed to freeze again. Even the engines felt distant. My husband took a small step forward. "Where is it?" he asked. The man smiled faintly again. My stomach dropped. Because that smile wasn't uncertainty. It was confirmation. "It's already moving," he said. My breath stopped. Moving. My husband's expression tightened sharply. "Where?" he demanded. The man looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Across this flight." A wave of confusion hit the cabin again, but beneath it was something worse. Realization that the aircraft itself was not just transport anymore. It was part of the operation. My husband's voice became low and urgent. "Who is carrying it?" he asked. The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked around the cabin briefly, scanning faces. And then he said something that made my blood turn cold. "Someone you trust is already holding it." My mind snapped in different directions at once. Passengers, crew, anyone. The woman in his grip made a faint sound again, barely conscious. My husband's face changed slightly. Not panic, but calculation. And that scared me more than anything. Because now, he wasn't just reacting anymore. He was searching. The man noticed it. "You see it now," he said quietly. "Why I chose this flight." My husband's voice was almost a whisper now. "This isn't about revenge anymore," he said. The man shook his head slowly. "No," he replied. "It never was just revenge." And then he added, "It's about what survives when the truth lands." A long silence followed. And I, sitting frozen in my seat, finally understood something I didn't want to understand. Whatever this transfer was, it was not just happening on this plane. It was being protected by this plane. And we were all inside it. After the man said, "Someone you trust is already holding it," the entire cabin felt like it had been split into two worlds, one visible and one hidden underneath it. My eyes moved instinctively across the passengers. Every face suddenly felt suspicious in a way it hadn't before. The quiet man 2 rows ahead, the woman clutching her handbag too tightly, the flight attendant standing frozen near the front, even the ones who looked completely broken by fear. Now they all felt like possibilities, like pieces in a system I was only now being forced to see. My husband noticed it too. But his reaction was different. He wasn't looking randomly. He was scanning with intention. Controlled, precise. Like he already understood the shape of what the man was implying, and now he was only confirming details. The man with the gun saw this shift and tightened his grip slightly on the woman again, not out of panic, but out of awareness. He knew the conversation had reached its most dangerous point now. "You're looking at them," the man said quietly. My husband didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "You're trying to create doubt." The man smiled faintly. "No," he replied, "I'm revealing structure." My stomach twisted again. Structure. That word again. Nothing about this was random anymore. The woman in his grip gave a weak, broken sound. Her strength was fading fast, and yet she was still being held upright, still being used as part of this invisible battle. My husband took a slow step forward. "Tell me where it is," he said. The man tilted his head slightly. "I already did," he replied. A pause. Then he added, "You just haven't seen it yet." My hands were shaking so badly, I pressed them tightly into my lap, trying to stay grounded in something physical, something real. My husband's voice lowered. "Who has it?" he asked again. The man looked at him for a long moment. And then, slowly, he said, "Someone who was never supposed to be involved." My mind immediately started searching faces again. A passenger. A crew member. Someone sitting quietly, unnoticed until now. The man continued. "And that's why you failed before," he said, "because you never saw the people you weren't watching." My husband's jaw tightened. "You're guessing," he said. But even as he said it, I could hear uncertainty starting to creep into his voice. The man shook his head. "I don't need to guess," he said. "I know how systems work, you taught me that." That line again, "you taught me that." It carried something deeper now, not just accusation, but familiarity, shared history twisted into something poisonous. The cabin was completely silent again. Even breathing felt dangerous. My husband spoke slowly. "If this is real," he said, "then stopping the aircraft is the only way to contain it." The man laughed softly. "And there it is," he said, still thinking like an operator. My husband didn't respond. The man's expression hardened again. "You still believe control solves everything," he said, "but control is exactly what failed her." The woman in his grip made another faint movement, like she was slipping closer to unconsciousness. My chest tightened painfully. My husband's voice dropped. "You're risking everyone here," he said. The man nodded slightly. "Yes," he replied, "just like you did." A long, suffocating silence followed. Then my husband did something I didn't expect. He slowly raised his hands, slightly, not surrendering, not attacking, but signaling something different. Stability. "I want you to listen to me carefully," he said. The man's eyes narrowed. "I've been listening," he said. My husband continued. "If there is anything on this flight," he said, "we can secure it without harming anyone." The man shook his head slowly. "You still don't understand," he said. My husband's voice sharpened. "Then make me understand," he said. And for the first time since this began, the man hesitated. Just a fraction. Just enough to change the air. Then he said quietly, "You already know who it is." My breath caught. My husband didn't move. The man's eyes stayed locked on him. "You've been watching them the whole time," he said. A cold wave passed through my body. And then, slowly, almost like the world itself was refusing to say it directly, my husband turned his head. Just slightly. Not toward the gunman. Not toward the front. But back. Toward the passengers behind him. And in that moment, I felt something inside me break into awareness. Because whatever was on this flight was no longer just a hidden object. It was a person. And my husband had just started looking for them. When my husband turned slightly toward the passengers, it felt like the entire cabin turned with him, like all of us had been pulled into the same invisible thread. No one moved. No one breathed normally. Even the man with the gun noticed the shift, because his grip tightened instinctively on the woman, as if preparing for a moment he had been waiting for since the beginning. My husband's eyes moved slowly across the rows. Not random anymore. Not searching blindly. Focused. Like something had finally aligned in his mind. And then he stopped. Just for a fraction of a second. On someone. I followed his gaze without wanting to. A passenger near the middle rows, quiet, still, hands folded tightly around a small bag held against their chest. Someone who had not drawn attention the entire flight. Someone who had looked like every other terrified traveler until now. My stomach dropped. The man with the gun noticed it too. A faint smile appeared on his face. "There," he said softly. The word was simple, but it changed everything. The passenger didn't move, not even when all eyes slowly began shifting toward them, not even when the weight of the entire cabin seemed to press down on that single seat. My husband took a slow step into the aisle again. "Is that it?" he asked quietly. The man with the gun didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched my husband carefully, like he was studying whether he had finally reached the correct conclusion on his own. Then he said, "You still need confirmation." My husband didn't respond, because now he knew. I could see it in his face. Not surprise. Not shock. Recognition. The passenger holding the bag lowered their head slightly, gripping it tighter. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought everyone could hear it. The woman in the gunman's grip made a weak sound again, barely conscious now, like even her role in this nightmare was fading. The man with the gun spoke again, quieter this time. "You taught me how systems survive," he said. "You forget that systems don't need many people, just the right one in the right place." My husband's voice was low. "That's not what this is," he said. But even he didn't sound fully certain anymore. The passenger finally spoke, very softly. "I didn't choose this," they said. The voice was trembling. Human. Real. And that made it worse. Because it meant they weren't a mastermind. They were a carrier. A piece of something larger. My husband closed his eyes for a brief moment. And when he opened them again, something had changed. Not softness. Not weakness. Acceptance. The man with the gun noticed immediately. "You see it now," he said. "There's no clean ending." My husband stepped forward slightly. "There is always an ending," he said. The man shook his head. "Not for this," he replied. The plane felt like it was holding its breath again. Every passenger frozen, inside a moment that felt like it had no exit. My husband looked at the passenger again. "Give it to me," he said quietly. The passenger hesitated. Their hands trembled around the bag. The entire cabin waited. Even the man with the gun seemed to pause slightly, not out of mercy, but anticipation. And then, a sudden movement. Not from the passenger. Not from my husband. From the front. The man with the gun shifted sharply, as if deciding the moment had finally reached its conclusion. The gun pressed tighter against the woman. My heart stopped. And then he spoke, his voice breaking through everything. "You still think this is about control," he said. "It was never about control." My husband didn't move. The man's eyes were fixed on him now. "It was about exposure," he said. A silence so deep followed that even time felt suspended. Then he added, "And now everyone sees it." My breath caught. My husband's expression changed slightly. Because in that instant, I understood what neither of them had fully said until now. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about a past death. It wasn't even just about a hidden transfer. It was about something being revealed in public. Here, inside this plane, at 30,000 feet, the passenger holding the bag began to shake harder. My husband looked at them one last time. And then he said quietly, "It's over." But the man with the gun smiled faintly and replied, "No." He looked around the cabin one final time, then back at my husband. "Now it begins." And that was the moment everything stopped being about the past. Because whatever was inside that bag was no longer just evidence. It was the trigger for what came next. And I, the widow, would remember that flight not as an ending, but as the moment my entire life split into two realities, before the truth came out and after nothing was ever the same again.